That was an incredible moment for our network because we got to meet Pope
Yeah,
Leo.
you got the scoop.
We were in the hall, and I decided, knowing the Vatican well since I worked in the Vatican several years ago, I kind of knew how things could shake out.
Father, any message for the United States?
When we realized he was from Chicago, of course, I'm from Chicago. Our network is based in Chicago. It was, I would say euphoria coming in from all the folks in Chicago.
And you know what it's like, Susie, because you've been here too. And I heard people going, oh, Americano, Americano. And I was like, holy moly.
You mentioned how he has spoken about artificial intelligence, several times, and that he wants to offer guidance from the church to respond, to deal with, to navigate this whole new world.
We had a fascinating conversation about that.
What do you think a meeting with President Donald Trump will look like?
Woo! What would it look like? Watch this space. Stay tuned to NewsNation. Listen to Susie Pinto. It's so crazy to have all these Americanisms and American references now connected to the papacy and to the Pope. It's just something you're so not used to.
I'll bring the hot dogs and
Bring the white socks. Bring that ice hockey team, whatever they do. Get them on over here.
Oh geez, you need a sports refresher. Welcome to One Nation Under God. I'm Susie Pinto. Today I'm joined by EWTN News foreign correspondent Colm Flynn in Rome. Colm, it's great to see you.
Susie, it's always great to see you. And this is cool because I'm here in the Eternal City where the Pope is right now, and you're in the very spot where the Pope came from.
Exactly. I'm in Chicago, the Pope's where the Pope was born. So this is a great connection between Rome and Chicago, these two important cities right now in the pontificate of Pope Leo the 14th. So it's been about a month since Pope Leo was elected. First of all, just first thoughts about that time, the conclave, the moment he came out on the balcony. Were you surprised?
Yeah. What a month it has been. It really has been a whirlwind because I think, with the last couple of years of the late Pope Francis, because of his age, because of his health condition, things were getting tougher and tougher for him. So we'd become used to a kind of slower pace of the papacy. Now, he was still doing a lot and he was traveling to a lot of far-flung places. But in terms of the energy of the day-to-day papacy around the Vatican, things were a little bit slower. So it just seems like things have been going at a racing pace over the past couple of weeks. Everything has been happening so quickly. But I was among the crowd of tens of thousands of people. They put the estimate maybe up over 100,000 people in and around St. Peter's Square when we saw the white smoke come out sooner than we had anticipated. And we waited and waited. And I'll admit, Susie, like everyone else, I thought it will never be an American because now I'm not a Vatican expert in that I've been working at the Vatican for decades, but a lot of people here, they're like that. And this is their bread and butter, what they sleep, breathe, and eat. And I interviewed all of them in the lead up to the conclave, and they said the same thing. America is the superpower. It controls capitalism. It is the player in geopolitics. It controls the entertainment industry. It's always been felt in the church. They can't have the papacy as well. And when I interviewed Bishop Barron, the famous American bishop, he said to me too, when I asked him about Prevost, I said, what about someone like Prevost? And he said, it won't be an American. He said, although he is the least American. So when we saw him come out to the balcony, and you know what it's like, Susie, because you've been here too, you're squinting because of the time of the day. The sun was going down behind St. Peter's, so your eyeballs are burning out of their sockets as you're trying to stare intently at that balcony on the front of St. Peter's Basilica. And you're like, who is that? And we had all had in our minds, it will be Cardinal Tagle from the Philippines, or maybe Paroline, the Secretariat of State, because these were the bookies' favorites. So we were all kind of brainwashed. Those are the people that it could be. And then when we heard Prevost, we all had to double check Prevost. Who's Prevost? And then I heard people going, oh, Americano. I was like, holy moly. And there was some Americans around, and the Americans are known for being quite quiet and shy and reserved, but they were shouting. And then there was the American flags. People started chanting USA. And I was like, wow, this is surreal. But then when he came out, it was interesting, Susie, because he didn't speak in English. He spoke in Italian, he spoke in Latin, then he spoke in Spanish. And we were all like, wow, okay, he's speaking to his Latin American community, the people in Peru where he served. He's obviously speaking the language of the papacy. He showed straight away, look, guys, take a chill pill. I'm American, but as they're saying now around Rome, and maybe tell me if you got a sense of this as well. But like a citizen of the world, I'm truly a man of the world, and it was amazing. And then I went live on NewsNation on my phone because there were so many people crammed in. Nobody could get a phone signal for 5G, so NewsNation were saying we have to get you on and do a video link, but it was just we had to go back to old cellular technology. So I was ranting and raving like a madman from the square, describing the scene going out live in NewsNation. And it was, I know it's a cliche, but it felt like you were there witnessing a beautiful moment in history.
Yeah, absolutely. Well said. I thought it was an absolute shock. The only thing I had been telling my News Nation team is that we don't know who it's going to be, but what I can tell you, the only thing I can assure you of is it won't be an American for all the same
Hmm.
reasons that you just laid out, that we just have been, all conventional wisdom says that the papacy will never be occupied by an American. It's just too much power in one place.
Yeah.
But, so that when he did come out onto that balcony, it was absolute shock, disbelief. When we realized he was from Chicago, of course, I'm from Chicago. Our network is based in Chicago. It was, I would say euphoria coming in from all the folks in Chicago. I started getting text messages from all over the world, but especially from friends in Chicago who just could not believe that a native son of Chicago could make it all the way to the papacy. So,
And
here in
actually,
Chicago.
Susie, let me ask you this, and sorry to cut across you, but the feeling that I got, and Cardinal Dolan of Timothy Dolan of New York, he said this at a press conference a few days later when he was asked, why was he picked and this and that. He said, to be honest, I didn't know much about Prevost, Cardinal Prevost before that. And that's the general sense I got from people, that he kind of was keeping his head below the radar. I know he was off down in Peru doing his missionary work, and then he was here in Rome, the head of the dicastery for bishops. But were you guys in Chicago, like, maybe because you have more local knowledge, thinking different than the rest of us, that maybe he could have the X factor and get it? Or did you know much about him before this?
I didn't know much about him at all, and you have to realize that, of course, he's been outside the United States for so many years. He left Chicago quite young. He actually didn't even go to high school in Chicago. He went to high school in
Ah,
Michigan. So, he definitely it was not on our radar, I would say. And of course, he became a priest and he became an Augustinian. He was, of course, in Rome, in Peru. So he wasn't really on the American scene. So I think that that was, a double surprise. Not only was he, not on our radar, but he hadn't been in America, and really in his roles as the head of the Augustinian order, and then even as the head of the bishop of the dicastery of bishops in Rome. I don't think he had he was in a big way in the public eye. So that factored into the surprise that it was a unknown American cardinal, a name. There was some press about him before. I think some, Vaticanisti, some of the veteran Vatican journalists. He was definitely on their radar because he ticked a lot of boxes. He, of course, had the right profile, pastoral experience, very, as a missionary in Peru for so many years, and then knows the Vatican very well. So I think he definitely, a few of our colleagues there in Rome had predicted it and were not surprised. But I think by and large, certainly the American press and certainly Americans were totally shocked.
yeah, and I think you're right. I think some people did predict it, but even when I was talking to people who did mention him, he was kind of in the second tier, a category of potential. So they would have like, look, this is the A team who we think can get it, because you and I know that there are so many cardinals. There's over 200, and some of them nobody knows at all, even within the church, just because they don't have a very public profile. Other cardinals do a lot of interviews. They're very media friendly, so people get to know them. And the feeling from all the networks, like the secular press too, were just, well, the ones who are out there, the ones who are well known, the ones who have the big jobs, like, for example, trying to broker peace over in Ukraine, between Russia and Ukraine, trying to help the people in the Holy Land, like Cardinal Pizzaballa. they were like, well, these guys must be the front runners because they're known, they have a profile, and they've got important roles within the Vatican already. But it just shows you how that saying is so true here in Rome, that he who goes in a pope, i.e. the favorite, comes back out a cardinal. Because when you think back to the election of Pope Francis, who was before that Jorge Mario Bergoglio, he was number 14 in the bookies' favorites. 14. Nobody saw that coming at the time either. So I think we keep having to remind people that the conclave is an election, like any election all over the world, but at the same time, it's not, because you have this deep spiritual element to it, and you hope and pray that these men are being guided by the Holy Spirit when they go inside of that Sistine Chapel. So it was just incredible. It was my first conclave. So I didn't sleep for around a month, and I lived off coffee, and it was incredible.
It certainly was. It was, like you said, witnessing a moment in history. So, now that it's been a few weeks and the shock has worn off, what do you think are some of the highlights of those first weeks as Pope?
There are so many. And actually, just before we recorded this, I have come out of the barracks of the Pontifical Swiss Guard. They're the guys you see standing in those beautiful, colorful uniforms all around St. Peter's Square. They have 4 different types of uniforms, actually. The colorful one that you're all used to seeing, red, purple, and orangey yellow. And then they have a blue one for the side gates of the Vatican. And then they're also seen in suits. When you see the Pope on foreign trips and you see the security running along beside the Pope Mobile, always to the right of the Pope Mobile, those guys in suits are Swiss Guard. And then on the left, it's the Vatican police and local law enforcement and all that. But they were telling me about the excitement and the energy that they're feeling with their new Pope, Pope Leo XIV. But the one thing that struck me so far, Susie, is already there is a sense of clarity that was not there under the previous papacy. And I don't mean that in a kind of derogatory way, because, these popes are human beings, and they have their characters, and they have their personality, they have their strengths, and they have their weaknesses, like you, like me, like all of us. And while Pope Francis had such a wonderful heart, a missionary heart, and those moments of humanity were so strong throughout his entire papacy. And I was so lucky to be able to go around the world with him and witness so many of them in Iraq or Papua New Guinea or South Sudan or wherever it may have been, with people who often didn't speak English, with people who were often not even Catholic. But he had a remarkable ability to be able to connect with them, recognize the suffering when he saw it. He knew the moment when to tap the driver of the Pope Mobile to stop, when he wanted to embrace someone with special needs or someone who was suffering. He knew how to embrace a young boy who had a question about his sick parents, or, that comment on the plane, who am I to judge, when he was asked a question about. So there were those moments, but then many Catholics that I interviewed around the world, they found that one of the other sides of the papacy was that it lacked clarity, they believed, in some of the core church teachings. And on the flip side of that, they believe now with Pope Leo XIV, they've already begun to see some of that clarity coming through. Because remember, he's a canon lawyer. I think he has a degree in mathematics as well. So we have an expectation, and we've seen it already, that he probably won't speak as freely off the cuff, maybe as Pope Francis would have. But for example, speaking to the diplomatic corps, when he met all the ambassadors from nations around the world who are accredited to the Holy See, he spoke about their role in promoting peace and fighting for peace. He told them to go back to their governments and promote the family unit. He went on to say, and that is a stable union between a man and a woman. He said that again yesterday during the Mass for the Jubilee of the Families. He's been speaking about artificial intelligence, which I think is a fascinating topic that Pope Francis had touched upon. He had said that artificial intelligence should not be used, for example, in weaponry, making it more precise and more deadly. He said that saddened him to see AI technology being used in this way. But Pope Leo has mentioned it, I think, 4 or 5 times already in just the first couple of weeks of his papacy. So my first impression, Susie, is a clarity, a modern touch, talking about artificial intelligence, and you kind of get the sense that he has a good understanding of what he's talking about when he mentions things like AI. He said it was the greatest threat today to human dignity, to justice, to labor as well. which connects him with him taking the name Leo the 14th after Leo the 13th. But I'm giving you this long, rambly answer, Susie, when you probably wanted a soundbite. You're like, wrap it up, Colm, come on. But
No, I
what's
appreciate
your
it.
first impression from across the pond in the US?
My first impression, I was there in Rome with the NewsNation team, and just a few days after he was elected, he met with journalists, as you alluded to. And that's, something that every pope does after their election, because of course there are thousands and thousands of journalists who come to Rome to cover the conclave, the funeral of the pope, and then the election, the conclave, and then the election. And so I think there are about 3,000 journalists in that Vatican hall. It's called Paul VI Hall, and that was our first opportunity to get to hear him speak off the cuff, or with he also of course read prepared remarks. But that was an incredible moment for our network because we got to meet Pope
Yeah,
Leo. we
you get the
were
scoop.
um, we were in the hall, and I decided, having knowing the Vatican well, since I worked in the Vatican several years ago, I kind of knew how things could shake out. And since this pope is relatively young and very mobile, I thought, he could probably come down the middle aisle and greet people on his way out. So our team there, Robert Sherman and Will Butkins, we basically were put ourselves in the aisle, and as he passed by, we were able to speak to him and to ask him a question. And of course, the question was, what was your message for what was his message for the United States? And he gave us a very interested, some called it loaded answer, which was, he looked at Robert Sherman and he
Many.
smiled and he said, "Many." Yeah.
Many, yeah.
So certainly, I'm sure he has in mind what he would like, to tell the United States, where he thinks he could weigh in on issues that are going on in the United States. But that was a thrilling and exciting moment, and really, on a personal level, I think I just found him to be a person of a lot of peace. He transmits a lot of peace. He's very comfortable in his role. He's very humble, but at the same time, he knows how to assume, the posture of a pope, and he just seems extremely comfortable in his own skin, and he knows where he's going and what he's about and what his messages are. Like I did find him to be very clear during that meeting. Of course, he talked about the importance of truth, and he thanked us for covering, that event, but also just in general for transmitting the truth to the public, which of course is the first goal and of any journalist, right, to transmit
Yeah.
the truth to our audience. So it was a thrilling moment, and he was thrilled when I said I'm from Chicago, and he came over and he said Chicago, and I just found him to be very warm, very natural, and very peaceful.
I don't know about you, but I thought I heard him say under his breath that he loves News Nation. Did you pick that up too, or was that just was that AI? I don't know.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely.
You know what's interesting about that, Susie, is that was the first time we heard him speak English, if you remember.
Yeah.
Because at the beginning when he came out, he cracked a joke in English. And talk about having, the people in front of you on your side, because he came out and everyone was applauding and standing as he came out, and then he kind of gestured for everyone to sit down. And we're trying to, as the journalists there, the worst kind of people, us journalists, and we're like, who is this guy, and what we're trying to get answers as to what we think he's like and his personality and this and that. And then he said, they say it's all well and good if you applaud at the beginning before a speech, but wait until I'm finished. And if you're still awake and you applaud then it means something. So that really broke the ice. And I think for us journalists, that kind of said to me, look, this is what the relationship is going to be like going forward. And we're going to have this nice, warm, cordial relationship. And the other thing was, yes, I think you hit the nail on the head there really brilliantly when you said he seemed at peace, because you think of the enormity. We cannot grasp what it means to take on the role of the successor of Saint Peter, the lineage to one of the 12 apostles of Jesus Christ. Because you think about it, this guy, Cardinal Prevost, was able to walk around Rome just a few days before that, go unnoticed by mainly everybody, and go into his favorite coffee shops and restaurants. As soon as he realized he was being um, elected as the successor of Peter and the Holy Father, his life had changed forever. Everything, every aspect of his life. And not only that, but the weight of what was going to now be on his shoulders to not only run the institution of the Catholic Church, which has its, again, strengths and weaknesses and its problems and the things that need to be fixed and the things that need to be reformed and pushed. But as the spiritual leader, the shepherd of over 1 billion people worldwide, in a world that is damaged, has war, has conflict, has confusion, has many, many problems, to see him take on all of that with a kind of remarkable calmness and acceptance. And I just mentioned to you that before we recorded this, I came from the barracks of the Pontifical Swiss Guard, and I was talking to a young guard, and he was telling me, I was asking him, what do you remember about the day? And remember, they, like us, were waiting for the smoke, black smoke, white smoke. He said he wasn't on duty that day, but he was on standby. And he was sitting in his office with his earpiece in, and he had a live stream going. And then across on the radio, before this white smoke came out, they got an alert saying, quick, stations, we have white smoke, we have a new pope. So he had to spring into action, and he was stationed outside in a square within the Vatican for a while. But then he was brought into I forget the name of the corridor, but right in front of the Sistine Chapel. And he was waiting there, and he told me that he heard applause inside the Sistine Chapel.
Oh, wow.
And then out came Pope Leo. He was already dressed in the garments and the vestments, the papal vestments that we saw him wearing coming to the balcony, was suggesting that he had already gone into what they call the room of tears next to the Sistine Chapel, where you have a moment after being congratulated by your brother cardinals after the election. You go into this room, and you have a moment of prayer and of silence to just realize and take in what is happening. There are 3 vestments on a railing, large, medium, and small. You have to fit into one of them. And then they're waiting for you in the balcony, and the crowds are waiting for you. So this
Yeah.
Swiss guard got to
After
shake his
you probably
hand.
cry your eyes out, right?
After you cry your eyes out and wonder probably, how can I do this? Why have I been
Yeah.
picked? But this Swiss guard, he showed me the photograph. Within maybe 20 minutes of the beginning of his papacy, got to shake his hand
Wow,
and say, hello,
amazing.
Holy Father, going by. It was like I was choking up, and how much it meant to this young Swiss man. It was, so incredible. You just
Yeah.
think of what they get to see, these Swiss guard. It's amazing.
Well, and also you mentioned the human side. We really saw that when he came out onto the balcony. You could tell that he was emotional. He was holding back tears. And that's, I think, for the world, that's an amazing witness because you see that the Pope, of course, is a spiritual leader. He's supposed to be a holy man, but he was very much a man on that balcony. And we can all relate to being overwhelmed or being afraid of some challenge. And so I think that that was really endearing to the public to see that he was so human and, was about to
Mm.
cry and was looking out into the crowd. And, I'm sure, can you imagine that, we've all seen that picture, like the entire square, there's, as you mentioned, over 100,000 people filling the square. And you feel, I met at that moment, you feel the weight of of the office.
And not only the square. I mean, Susie, you were there. You've got the huge television stands. And when he would stand there on that balcony and he would see the sea of people going back, and also because of today's day and age, you see a sea of little lights and iPhones in the air. It's just like a sea of iPhones. That's one thing I noticed as well, is that you, smartphones as far as the eye can see being held up in the air. But you also have the stands with all their huge lights and hundreds of television cameras beaming the pictures back live to every corner of the world. And as a journalist here covering it, for weeks, I was talking to the good people on NewsNation, and then you'd be on BBC, and then you hear didgeridoos in the background when you're talking to hey, good morning, Australia. You're live across Sydney, and the interest and the fascination around the whole thing. And I want to talk to you about that. Why you think there was such an enormous interest? We believe that this was probably the most closely watched conclave in history. And I think part of that is because of the interest from the movie Conclave and the 2 popes and the Vatican Girl on Netflix and all this stuff that brought it into the zeitgeist. But I had a sense that people looking at this, they love a big spectacle and a big event, one, but we get them all the time. Sports events are huge now. You turn on American Idol or the X Factor, they're huge sets and lighting of fireworks. So we get them all the time, but I think people watching, whether consciously or subconsciously, they realized they could sense there was something more profound to what was happening here. And they could see the history, the symbolism. But, coming off the back of this time of being told you'll get your fulfillment and your happiness from your career, your fame, your fortune, now your followers. How many followers do you have? You know, you go to New York and they ask you, what do you do? You go to Washington, D.C., they ask, who do you know? You go to L.A., someone asks me, oh, hi, nice to meet you. How many followers do you have? And, you know, that kind of defines people in the world today. But they see this institution that's going back thousands of years that isn't looking for anything in return, but it's preaching a message about the immense human dignity that you have, protecting life, all these messages that you get nowhere else in the world, really. Um, I don't know. I got a sense, Susie, and I'm not sure how you felt, but people, maybe if they could articulate it or not, were just sensing something profound about what they were watching unfold in front of them.
Absolutely. I think when I was there, you could feel all the eyes of the entire world were on Rome, were on St. Peter's, were looking, waiting with bated breath to see if that smoke was coming out. And you ask a very good question, why? Because of course,
Because it's a chimney. They were watching a chimney and a
it's a
seagull.
chimney, and there are many Catholics in the world. There are 1.4 billion Catholics, but there are many non-Catholics, and there are many people who have no faith at all and who don't believe and actually have hostility towards belief, and certainly towards the Catholic Church. So why did they
Mm,
care when the Catholic Church elects its leader? But I think that goes to really the reason is because the Vatican and the Pope, that figure is the only moral authority in the world at this point in history. And I think a lot of people, whether or not they like what the Vatican says, they do look to it for direction, for guidance. And I think Pope Francis certainly was extremely popular, especially amongst non-Catholics. I think he really got the attention of a lot of people who were not believers to think to stop and think and say, oh, I love his message of God's mercy and God loves me. And so I think he did really attract a lot of attention. But I think that the Pope and the Vatican is a singular voice in the world when a lot of people today are looking for guidance. There's a lot of loneliness in this world. Everyone is, I think there's sort of a social crisis. There certainly the family is experiencing a crisis. And I think that people are looking for guidance. People are looking for values. People want to have a life of meaning and purpose. We certainly see this with young people today. They're not necessarily interested in work or making $1 million. They really are looking for meaning and for purpose. And
mm.
so I think the Vatican really provides a lot of insight on that when it comes to our life and beyond the material things, like and certainly answering some of those quintessential questions of why am I here? What am I doing? Where am I going? What's my life worth? What is the whole point of this life? And I think also in America specifically, I think a lot of people are just there's a rat race. They feel like they're constantly just trying to make ends meet and trying to make it to the end of the day and to keep their family together. And I think that there is a lot of fatigue, and so they feel that for whatever reason the Vatican is that voice that will provide them that guidance and those guideposts that will help them to live a happier life.
And I think what, the Pope Francis always spoke about this, upholding the innate dignity of every human being, because I know myself from living in New York for 5 years. Obviously, I'm from Ireland, growing up in Ireland, going to college there, and now living in Rome and traveling around the world. Um, you know, we hold up the people, the great athletes, the people who came first in the Olympics, the ones who are the biggest influencers. The companies love you when you're flying high and making the money and this and that. And the amazing thing that I've seen firsthand, and I'm just telling you as I've seen it, whether it's across the continent of Africa or Latin America, across Asia, where I've went to report with the Holy Father, with Pope Francis, but even outside of that, just doing separate reports, everywhere you go, Belarus, filming in the orphanages, who's looking after the children still affected by the radiation from Chernobyl? It's priests, it's nuns, it's brothers, it's the Catholic Church. Are they known? No. Are they getting social media followers? Are they getting big money? Are they getting fame? They're not getting any of that. Why are they doing it? Why are there people helping in the leprosy colonies still today in South Sudan? Why are they running these homeless shelters in the hardest hit slums in Buenos Aires in Argentina? It's a remarkable thing when you see that selflessness, but these people are doing it in the name of the faith, of what they really believe in. And the church, they've been the spearhead of that here in Rome, representing all of that and trying to coordinate all of that. It's an amazing thing. And when you mentioned it, Susie, again, you say it so correctly about even people of other faiths and people of no faith as well, this resonating with them. I remember being on a show on the BBC around the time of the conclave, and the anchor asked me, Colm, we see so many heads of state, attending the funeral of Pope Francis. Many countries, very small Catholic communities, very secular countries, but the heads of state coming to pay their last respects. And then nations, Muslim nations, where they've no Catholics whatsoever. Why is that? And I made the point that you made, which was, we know that politicians, it's widely regarded and accepted that they have the ability to influence and change the minds of people. But it's the spiritual leaders like Pope Francis, like Pope Leo XIV, who have the ability to change people's hearts. And that is a unique thing, which is why when Pope Francis, for example, went to the United Arab Emirates, or went to the nation of Iraq, or went to Papua New Guinea, where there are no Catholics, the red carpet is rolled out, the guards are standing to welcome them, the bands are playing the national anthem of Vatican City State, and the Pope is welcomed with open arms, because they see and respect that message that he carries, which transcends the Catholicism. It goes across languages. And that was the wonderful thing again about Pope Francis, because often those moments of humanity, like him embracing someone with severe special needs or disabilities, or washing the feet of the prisoners, which he famously did soon
Yes.
after becoming Pope, female prisoners at that, though it doesn't matter what language you speak. When you see someone who you know is a powerful figure down on their knees washing a prisoner's feet, who is at the bottom rim of society, as people might look at it and say, well, they're a prisoner, they're locked up, that's a powerful, powerful message that doesn't matter what language you speak, you understand it on a fundamental level. So that is the challenge now for this new Pope, Susie, to carry this legacy and to build on it for what, please God, he's only 69, and he's a young 69 at that, who trained at the gym that I go to just up the street. We could be in for a very long papacy like Pope John
Yeah.
Paul II. So in a world, again, with artificial intelligence, or with what that's doing to the world around us, it's going to be fascinating to see how this develops.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, you mentioned how he has spoken about artificial intelligence, several times, and that he wants to offer guidance from the church to respond, to deal with, to navigate this whole new world, which is, already taking over in many ways. I think that is a brilliant response because I think, there are many questions about how it will affect jobs, how it'll affect human relationships, how it'll affect education. So I think that the world, many people might think, what does the church have to do with artificial intelligence? And as Pope Francis pointed out in his document on artificial intelligence, which by the way came out in January of 2025, so just a few months ago, obviously anything that affects the human being and human dignity, of course, the church is interested in. So I thought that document was very interesting because it talks about how artificial intelligence in and of itself is not a bad thing in the eyes of the church. Technology, science, uh, you know, eh, advancement of technology is seen as a good thing by the church. But if it affects the human being and it replaces human intelligence, of course, the church in that document is warning that we have to be very careful because human beings can never be put aside by machines or by technology.
Mm.
So I wonder what he's going to say. I wonder if that's going to come in the form of a document, or if he's just going to provide teaching on it at his Wednesday audiences. It'll be really interesting to see because, of course, it is dominating every aspect of our life and will probably in the future.
Yeah, and like I said, he brought it up when he met us journalists. He told us to use it to uplift the common good, artificial intelligence. And we know now with fake news and with AI images online, sometimes it's hard to tell what's real, what's not. and that can really sway public opinion one way or the other. So there's a great responsibility there to use the tools responsibly. And then the other thing as well, because he wants to follow in the footsteps of Pope Leo XIII, who came off the back end of the Industrial Revolution at a time when workers were saying, well, with all this new industry and methods of industry, what does that mean for my job and what I do? And it's the same with AI now. In the business that we work in, we are using AI more and more to speed up the editing process of TV programs, stuff that would have been done by an editor. Maybe the kind of fundamental first stage editing of a program can be put through an AI software now that will do the cut for us. Voiceovers, where we would normally maybe get a voiceover artist in. Sometimes we're saying, well, could we use this a little bit? If we use an AI voice instead of getting an actor into a studio in London at a huge cost and all this kind of thing, if it sounds the same and we're not changing the meaning, then what's the difference? But it's taking work from that person. And then, there's been one or two really tragic stories, like that young boy who was, I think, 14 or 15 in the United States, who took his own life after developing a relationship with an AI bot, one of these services where you could have a romantic relationship with an artificial intelligence being on a website, and fell in love with it. And his mother spoke on American television about this. She was horrified after he had passed away, when he took his own life, to find all these messages in the phone, so human-like, that seemed so real. And at the end, he said, I'm feeling really bad. I want to be with you. And this AI woman responded, yes, come be with me. And he took that to mean, you should end your life and come. That's how we'll be together.
Tragic, so
So
terrible.
it's tragic. And this is uncharted territory. And
Yeah.
so, of course, the church is interested in this, saying they can see the church. And remember, the church, this is nothing new about, in terms of the church being at the forefront of technology and science. You look at the Vatican Observatory, one of the oldest observatories in the world, out at Castel Gandolfo. So they're looking at this saying, okay, this is emerging. We can see the potential good and we can see the potential dangers. So we need to try and sway public opinion and encourage people as best we can all over the world. This has to be used for good, because we all know, we've seen little signs of it so far, that it could be used for the complete opposite.
Yeah, and perhaps the fact that he's American is why he's so in tune with the whole
Mm.
AI revolution, and he realizes how important technology is in society. He's certainly, as you said, very modern, very he's on the younger side. He's 69, but he's in really good shape. But I can't help but think that his being American has to do with the fact that he realizes, because just technology and all things tech are so important in American culture and society, and then certainly developing, a lot of these technologies, Silicon Valley, et cetera. I'm sure that had an influence on this focus of his.
Yeah, and as you say, how will he address it? I think that's what's interesting for us, because the Pope has what are called encyclicals, as you know, and these are major teaching documents, kind of some of the hallmarks of their papacy, that really define where they stand on issues, or the emphasis, where they want to put the emphasis, and the issues they want to really push, and their legacy as well. So we look back, and of course, Pope Francis had an encyclical about the environment and about caring for our common home, the planet, an encyclical of us being brothers and sisters and living together in harmony. So some people are asking around here, oh, will Pope Leo, will his first encyclical be about artificial intelligence, or will he just keep bringing it up and mentioning it? So we'll have to wait and see. But I can tell you, Susie, to bring it right back to the start, like, I mean, when you asked what the last couple of weeks have been like, the Swiss Guards that I were talking to today, and I just keep bringing them up because I was just with them within the last hour. One of them said to me as well that when Pope Francis passed away, they thought, because it was like someone in your family passing, a figure, like a grandfather figure. What's it going to be like? Pope Francis has gone, a new pope. It doesn't make sense. There can't be another pope. That's the pope I grew up with. That's the pope I always remember. He is Pope Francis. But they said that as soon as they saw Pope Leo, okay, this is beautiful. It just seemed to fit, and it was that natural continuity. So there is a great excitement. There seems like a vitality to the papacy at the moment. We have to be honest and realistic. All these papacies have their honeymoon stage when
Yeah,
everyone is having a good time. People on the more progressive liberal left are saying, he's one of ours. This is wonderful. People on the more traditional conservative right are saying, he's one of us. He's one of
yeah.
our guys.
Everyone's
Look at
trying
the
to claim him, right?
Yes. So, but that's a good thing. And that's something that he's talked about a few times. Look, unity. He came out on the balcony that day when, after the white smoke, he mentioned some of the hallmarks of Pope Francis's papacy, how he wanted to continue the legacy, but he was wearing the more traditional, classical papal attire. And he has gone to Castel Gandolfo, to the Summer Palace, albeit just for one day. But Pope Francis never went there in his entire pontificate. He didn't want to use the Summer Palace, and he said, and many celebrated this, that, well, poor people don't have summer palaces where they go to for the summer, so I will not use that. But then on the other side, that whole town relied on, Pope Francis going there for the summer, for them to survive, the shops and the
Yeah.
restaurants and the hotels. And they have also, it's not just the papal palace, but they have like I said, the Vatican Observatory, they have the Vatican Farm, and lots of other things. But it looks like Pope Leo may be using that again because he's already went there for one day. So we'll have to see what he will reinstate that Pope Francis kind of left to the side, and how he will change things going forward. It's going to be fascinating.
No, JD Vance issued an invitation to him when they met after his installation to visit the United States. Do you think he could come to the United States soon? And what do you think a meeting with President Donald Trump will look like?
Woo! What would it look like? That's who knows? Who knows? Because actually, recently I interviewed one of the most well-respected cardinals in all of Africa, on the African continent, Cardinal Wilfred Napier of Durban, South Africa, and I was talking to him about that very contentious meeting between US President Donald Trump and the South African president in the Oval Office. And so we had a fascinating conversation about that. And I was saying, look, Cardinal Napier, you are there on the ground. You've been through all apartheid. You see what it's happening there, and the churches everywhere. What's the situation? What's happening in South Africa? But JD Vance, Vice President JD Vance, talk about being in the right place at the right time, and a lucky person for, in terms of him just personally being a Catholic, because you know that before Pope Francis passed away, the day before he died, the last person he met in an official capacity was Vice President JD Vance.
Yeah,
And
amazing.
Vance went in not with his wife or his children. He went in on his own, and he met with the Holy Father, who was unwell. You could see he was sitting in his wheelchair. Vatican TV gave us the footage of that. The phrase short and sweet, that's exactly what it was. JD Vance said to him, "It's good to see you, and I'm glad to see you're doing better," acknowledging that he'd been in hospital for over 5 weeks. The Pope said, "It's good to see you too." There weren't too many words exchanged, not that we saw anyway in the official footage, but the Pope gave him three things. He gave him a Vatican tie, he gave him blessed rosary beads, a couple of sets of blessed rosary beads, and then he gave him some Kinder Easter eggs for his children. The following day, the Pope passed away. The
Yeah.
following morning, around 7 a.m. local time here in Rome. One of the first people to meet the new the new Pope, excuse me, was again Vice President JD Vance, to meet Pope Leo XIV. So for him as a Catholic, that's an incredibly privileged position to be in,
Yes,
regardless of
absolutely.
politics and what they agree on and what they disagreed on. To be one of the last people to meet a sitting Pope and then be one of the first people to meet the next Pope, that's an incredible thing.
That's an incredible opportunity. And, you mentioned some of their differences, or at least their political differences. But I think what was really beautiful when Vice President Vance met Pope Francis in that encounter, he was extremely moved.
Mm,
Vance was, by his meeting, and he spoke about it, and he posted about it on social media. And I think that what the world doesn't understand is that in those moments you put aside all of your, who you are as the politician. And I think in many ways he was meeting with Pope Francis as a Catholic, as somebody who believed. Of course, he's a convert. I think he converted in 2019. So I noticed that he was extremely moved by seeing the Pope so ill and making such an effort. And when you think about it, I mean, Pope Francis, those last few days, he made such a gargantuan effort to be with the people until the very end. He was so ill, and yet on Easter Sunday, he was out. He was, he greeted the people. He went around in the Pope mobile, and you could tell how ill he was. And he still wanted to make that last effort to be with the people until the very end. So I think, many people were moved by that service to the people, that desire to the very end to be, that symbol, that figure for the people. right until his death, really, because that was less than 24 hours before he passed away.
Yeah, and as a journalist, one of the obviously, covering the funeral of Pope Francis, very moving experience. But you're talking all about his legacy, and when you're on air covering it, you're just kind of trying to remember, okay, get all their facts right, and what year again did he become the Pope, and the exact name of the place in Buenos Aires where he's from, and all that. So you're not on autopilot, but you're just making sure you as accurately and as fairly and as balanced as possible present what's happening at the moment. But I remember the only time I actually tried to hold back the tears. I was on Australian breakfast television, Sunrise, on Channel 7. It's the biggest breakfast show in Australia, a bit like the Today Show in the US or Good Morning America. And just before going on air, I was handed a press release from the Vatican, which was a statement, I don't know if you saw this, Susie, from Mr. Surapetti. And Mr. Surapetti was the personal private nurse of Pope Francis and had been for a number of years. And he had released some statements, his account of Pope Francis's last 24 hours. So I read this quickly, absorbed it, went on Australian television, and they said, Colm, what have you got for us? What's the latest from Rome? And I said, well, actually, I've just been told this. And it was such an emotional account. Mr. Surapetti was the man who pushed him out in his wheelchair to the balcony on that Easter Sunday for the final time. And you think about 2013, when the world saw Jorge Mario Bergoglio, Pope Francis, for the first time. They saw him stand on that balcony. And then the world saw him for the very last time on that Easter Sunday, when he could barely speak. Let's be honest. He was struggling to speak into the microphone, and he wished everyone a happy Sunday, a happy Easter, and everyone applauded. But you could hear in the speakers the frailty in his voice. The man who wheeled him out was Mr. Surapetti. And he said that it was Pope Francis who asked him, please bring me to the balcony.
It's
And
amazing.
he said that after he came in from the balcony, Mr. Surapetti said to the Holy Father, Pope Francis, how do you feel? And he said something like, and I'm paraphrasing now, but you can look up the exact wording, which was something like, I'm feeling tired, but I'm happy I did it. I'm glad I did it. And then Mr. Surapetti told the story of then on that Monday morning, when at around 5:30 a.m. local time here in Rome, the first signs that things were going downhill very fast for the Holy Father, he was called to Casa Santa Marta, the residence where the Pope was living. And he was staying on the second floor, the Pope Francis's bedroom. And then after around an hour, he had slipped in, he was about to slip into a coma. And Mr. Surapetti recalled he was standing at the door, looking over at the bed. He had said what he had to say to the Holy Father, and he looked over, and Pope Francis put up his hand and gestured goodbye. And then he went straight into a coma and he passed away. And it was just such, like, I get a little bit choked up now thinking about it. It was just such a human, beautiful moment that he shared with the world. And I remember just recalling it and retelling it live across Australia. And the beautiful human behind the scenes connection between the nurse and Pope Francis, and that wonderful relationship they had, the frailty, but he still wanted to go to the balcony, fighting till the very, very end.
So beautiful. Such a
Mm.
witness to the world.
Yeah.
Such a witness.
I'm sorry to
So
bring the mood of the podcast down, Susie. You want to, sorry to be a Debbie Downer here, but what's the
no.
weather like in Chicago? It's a beautiful day here in Rome. I'm looking outside. The sun is shining.
So tell us just quickly, what's on Pope Leo's agenda for the next few weeks? What are we going to see him doing?
I'm not sure, to give you the honest answer, because we have been playing catch up about where's he going next and what he's doing. Because, like I said, so many things have been jam packed in, and we're often kind of playing catch up and saying, "Oh, he's doing this
Yeah.
tomorrow. Okay, how do we cover this?" And with the Jubilee of Families, that went ahead this weekend. It was an incredible event. We have all the other Jubilee events coming up for influencers. Is coming up. The Jubilee for digital social influencers. It's the Jubilee is still going ahead. It only comes around once every 25 years. So we're waiting to see if events like the canonization of Carlo Acutis, the millennial saint, that was meant to happen a month ago, and in its place that day was the funeral of Pope Francis, the Holy Father. So there are certain things. Again, the swearing in of the new Swiss Guard was meant to happen. That's been postponed. We're waiting to see where these pieces of the jigsaw can be slotted in.
Yeah.
But I'm sure, look, Pope Leo, he's taken on a new job. He's trying to find his feet, I'm sure. the sense around here, but again, is we could be wrong, is that we probably won't see Pope Leo make those big international transatlantic, global trips for a while until he kind of gets things in order here at the Vatican. There's a lot of things with the Vatican finances. That's a whole podcast for another day that we could talk about. Personnel changes at the top of various Vatican departments. They're called the dicasteries. That's another podcast for another day. But let's see. He has mentioned that he wants to go to Turkey. That was something Pope Francis had already committed to. So I believe he said that he wants to see that commitment through. That'll be sticking here in Europe. And then apart from that, long term, we'll have to wait and see. Watch this space. Stay tuned to NewsNation. Listen to Susie Pinto, and you'll never miss a beat.
Well, I can tell you here in Chicago, there's going to be an event on June 14th in the ballpark where the White Sox play, Rate Field.
Yeah.
And we're going to be celebrating the first American Pope from Chicago, Chicago's native son. And there's going to be music, and I think Pope Leo is going to send a message via video, and then there's going to be a mass. And those tickets went on sale. They charged a nominal fee of $5 per ticket, and they're already sold out. And apparently now people are reselling them for hundreds of dollars. So that's just to show you the interest here in Chicago. And there's a lot of pride. I mean, I think Chicagoans are just so proud to have a pope from their city. And just bursting with pride and a lot of joy here in Chicago.
Yeah, because I'm Irish, and I'm not that smart anywhere, that intelligent. It's funny when I'm out interviewing people in the square and they're from America and they're using all these references that go way over my head. So they're like, yeah, he's a White Sox fan, and they're waiting for me to react, and I'm like, no way, the White Sox, that best basketball team I've ever seen. I'm just like, what? Well, I get it, and I love it, and I'm like, it's just so funny, yeah.
Yeah, well, here in Chicago, his fellow Southsiders are just thrilled.
But it's so crazy to have all these Americanisms and American references now connected to the papacy and to the Pope. It's just something you're so not used to, which is pretty cool. I think we're in for a great papacy.
Yeah, I think it's going to be fascinating to see what he does. And yeah, of course, it's like a very unique moment in history, isn't it?
It is. And you know what? I can't wait, Susie, when NewsNation relocate you over here, because clearly now with an American Pope, and I know, and you can talk to Sean or whoever we need to talk to there. We have to build a studio overlooking the St. Peter's Square, staff it up,
Absolutely, 100%.
I'll bring the vino, I'll bring the spaghetti, the gnocchi, and you bring the guys over.
I'll bring the hot dogs and
bring the White Sox, bring that ice hockey team, whatever they do, get them on over here.
Oh geez. You need a sports refresher, Colm. But anyway,
I think so.
But listen, thank you so much for joining me. This has been a fascinating conversation, and keep us posted on everything that Pope Leo is doing.
Susie, it's been my absolute pleasure, and thank you so much for having me on.
Okay, take care.
Thank you for watching. Subscribe below and download our NewsNation app right now on your phone, and you will get fact-based, unbiased news for all Americans.